Nick, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Very challenging week for everyone, just as challenging for everybody within this sport and those trying to find a path through this and a way forward. First question, they're racing in Ireland behind closed doors. Why are we not racing in Britain?
Well, I think they're at different stages in Ireland to where we are here. Our first priority is obviously to the health of the public, our customers and the racing industry staff. We've seen and been warned about, we spoke to a number of parliamentarians and health workers and other senior figures earlier this week, and that evidence was provided to the industry's leaders when we discussed taking the very, serious decision, obviously major decision with major impact. The pressures on the NHS are growing by the day. You've been talking about it now, and we had to take our decision in light of that, with a view to looking after our participants and getting ready for a resumption when we can. Ireland, where there's a lot of talk about COVID-19 curves. You've heard quite a bit about the fact that Britain is 14 or 15 days behind the situation in Italy. We've seen pictures on various channels over the last couple of days about the situation there. And our curve is following, or if not slightly ahead of that, based on some of the information analysis today. Ireland is further behind that, and so that they've followed their government's advice, and we followed our government's advice all the way through, which is why we did race at Cheltenham, because at the time the advice was, from medical professionals inside the sport and from government that we could continue. But that changed very quickly over last weekend, and with the Prime Minister's statement on Monday afternoon.
Everyone at the moment is looking back and looking forward. Is there any part of you that regrets being part of the COVID-19 advisory group that said that Cheltenham could go ahead?
No, not at all, because as we consistently said all the way through, and we were asked to by government, by DCMS, please, follow government's advice, to try and stick with it all the way through. And as we approached Cheltenham, we sought clarity from government, and a number of other sports leaders have had various meetings with DCMS all the way through this. And the advice was, to continue. There was going to be no stopping on mass gatherings. We were still very much in the first stage, the contain phase, and that there was no reason not to continue with Cheltenham. Now, obviously, the mood changed and the advice changed that week. We had the Chancellor's budget on the Wednesday. We had new advice on the Thursday. The government started to signal up, and no doubt you and others were all talking about it at Cheltenham on the Friday, starting to signal up what was likely to come, and things had changed very rapidly. So much so that we spent all of that weekend saying to industry leaders, we now need to bring about our decision to go behind closed doors. But then again, very quickly it moved, and you've seen just how quickly it's been moving this week. The predictions made by those that we spoke to are unfortunately coming true in terms of what we're likely to see, and it was that sort of medical and public advice that was given to us which contributed heavily to the decision.
I just want to talk about the measures moving forward for people in the industry who are going to incur significant financial hardship. To what extent is racing putting in a series of its own measures to supplement what the Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced on Thursday evening?
Well, that was very welcome, those measures on Friday, actually.
So Friday, apologies.
Yeah, that was very welcome. Our immediate priorities are threefold. They're all linked: money, people, and looking after our people and looking after our horses. We've got some money from government, and that can make a significant difference, albeit that we recognise that there is still more clarity required for self-employed, and the fact that the money is available for this new word, furloughed people, people who are effectively laid off for a period of time. That will help a number of businesses in racing, but we recognise that in trainers' yards, the horses still need looking after, so employment is still required to look after our horses. So now that the government has set out its scheme, our priority now, and the leaders from across the industry have been working on this and are meeting again tomorrow, and we've been working over the weekend by email on this as well, to try and develop the plans. We now need to go to the levy board, which is standing by waiting to help the Racing Foundation and other funders with clarity about where we need to provide funding over the next 3 months. And one of the emerging ideas is to make sure that we provide liquidity and support for horses in training, to retain horses in training so that they're looked after for two reasons. One, for their welfare, of course, and one, to ensure that we maintain employment and cash flow, and so that the industry is ready for a return. Secondly, we said, and I can return to some of this, Nick. Secondly, we said that we've got to look after our people, and that starts with their health too, and their needs, not just their physical health, but their mental health, and we're looking at support there, and for hardship payments through racing welfare, which is the first point of contact that we would encourage people to go to. And Dawn and her team, have been immense in setting up additional services and support this week for anyone in the industry. And as I said, finally, we've got to make sure that we look after our horses, and hopefully the financial measures and the support for our people will help us to do that.
To me, that's the what mustn't happen is what is clearly a health crisis for racing, but for the entire world, turn into a welfare crisis for horse racing, and that ends up being a second crisis in 2020, and that must be almost top of your entire list of things to think forward about, Nick. It is
top of list, and we need to make sure that we're hearing today that Robert Jenrick was on Sky earlier saying that if you're not a key worker, you should stay at home. Although the government hasn't yet said if you're not a key worker, you should not work, as evidenced by this programme, for example.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that people who look after our horses can be classed as key workers. Otherwise, the consequences are obvious to all of those of us who work in the industry. But we're working on those three things, and the financial one we must make some progress on in the next few days. The levy board meets on Wednesday. Rob Heasel and the trustees at the Racing Foundation have already made a statement about they're ready and willing to support, and we are now working to ensure that we direct those monies as best we can. I think the message for employers in the industry is, look at the package that was put out on Friday, seek to think how you'll take advantage of that, and we're looking to top that up as best we can in all the right places so that we have a sustainable industry to come back to when we do return to racing.
So it's not impossible that you can replicate what the government was doing by giving an industry-wide blanket grant to training yards, essentially, according to how many horses they have in training.
Look, I neither want to make false promises nor deny hope. What we're saying is that we must consider support for the key parts of our industry, and one of the areas where it is obvious that support will be needed is that we will continue to need. You won't be able to furlough all workers. It's a great new word. To furlough all workers in racing yards. The horses need looking after. We recognise that owners are facing, hardships themselves or challenges in their own financial worlds, and there's obviously something that we could do there. And I know, my colleague Charlie Liverton is leading up some thinking on that specifically. Rupert Arnold at the NTF as well, and together with a series of other executives, we're thinking through how we can make sure that we provide support that works over the next few days.
And what about support for the self-employed, for jockeys in particular?
Well, we're trying to make sense of what was alluded to and or announced on Friday about self-employed. There's been quite a bit more push around what the government is doing for the self-employed. There was some initial work mentioned around suspending the second tax payment due in the summer, and also some talk about providing universal credit. Obviously, in itself, that isn't likely to prove enough for a number of people in our industry. Paul Struthers, through the IGF and others, has got some self-help for jockeys in place, and we'll just need to see how the industry can best meet the needs of these people. So when we go to the Levy Board and the Racing Foundation this week, as well as the measures that we're examining around supporting horses in training, shall we say, we need to look at all the other parts of the industry to make sure that we can do the best we can to keep it intact, ready for return. Yeah,
ready for return. Now, this is the key. Two key points. I know Cornelius wants to say something. I'll just quickly get you on the return of racing. Now, if the curve is not going to reach its peak, according to the government, for at least another 12 weeks, racing surely can't have any hope of returning, can it, Nick, in that 12-week period? Surely we've got to extend that period to manage people's expectations.
Well, I think it's too early to do that, but as you know, it's changing every day, so we do have to manage that message. We have been looking. We realise the implication of a long break, obviously. So whilst we can provide financial support and so on in the way that we've started to describe today, and I hope we'll be able to make pretty clear over the next week, there are obviously implications on a generation of 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. What happens to the pattern? Where will we go? What does this mean for our sister industries around breeding and the sales side? And we have to look at all possibilities for a return. The UK's people may get fed up at some point in this, and government will be looking for a return to economic activity as quickly as safely possible. But we can't predict that at this stage. We are looking at a number of possibilities about whether we could race safely. And given the restrictions that are in place now or have been in place, we're going to have to think very creatively, because we talk about moving horses around in Ireland, and that's okay for now, given where they are on the curve. We're effectively being told, stay at home. So any solution will have to involve something very creative, probably in a very localized area, and we're examining the feasibility of that. But we must do it in a way that doesn't drain public services, and where individuals are happy to take part on that basis. And it's too early to suggest that that's going to happen.
Nick, are you suggesting something along an American model of a sort of everyone being together in one enclosed community?
We are not thinking. Look, I don't want to set any hairs running, other than to say that I want to assure people that we're not sitting here waiting for 12 or 14 weeks to go by and thinking, we better start thinking about how we might return.
Yeah, you're coming up with creative ideas.
When we suspended racing, we said that we would keep the decision under review, and we would look at how and when we could bring some form of racing back as soon as we could, and we are keeping that in mind. I'm not suggesting that will happen in the next week. I'm suggesting that all of the parties are working on it. We're getting approaches from people in the industry with constructive messages about how we might think about that. This is a time to work together, because the people who are leading each section of the industry, so people like Rupert at the NTF, Paul Struthers at the PGA, and so on, Charlie Liverton, everyone who's involved here is working morning, noon and night to help their members, and I'd ask people to bear that in mind and support them. We're all trying to do the right thing by this industry, and we're all working to do all that we can on it.
Nick, you've been generous with your time, and I know you're very busy. I know you've got a lot to do today. Finally, you need to respond, I think, you may not wish to Peter Savile, who has put his head above the parapet and criticised the decision to suspend racing, and he's gathered around him a little bit of industry support as well, just looking at social media. Savile criticises BHA decision to suspend racing in face of coronavirus. This was just yesterday. Ex-BHB chairman thinks regulators should have allowed behind closed doors action, as there is in Ireland. In brief, would you like to put your rejoinder to that?
Yeah, I understand the letter was in on Thursday, so I don't know if he still feels exactly the same. But firstly, I would say racing needs to work together to sort out the money issues and look after our people and our horses, then develop our case for resumption, as we've said. Secondly, we've had good advice from doctors, politicians and senior people on what's coming. What was made clear to our leaders earlier this week was that we are 14 or 15 days behind Italy, and there'll be a growth in cases and deaths. I don't really want to add to the speculation about what might happen based on what we've been privy to. I'm not going to add to those remarks, and I'd ask people just to look at the context we're in, and I'm going to look forward, not back. Racing should be showing the public why we've been so long central to national life and culture. Let's show the people what we stand for, which is community care and hard work, and make sure that people say that we did our bit when it mattered most. All that said, we will look after our sport as best we can, and I hope you've got an idea from this morning of how we're trying to do that.
Nick, thank you very much. Subscribe to Racing TV to be notified when more Luck on Sunday videos are appearing online. And don't forget to join me for the show every Sunday morning from 9 o'clock with the best guests.